Testing, testing. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have quorum. We'll start the meeting of the Finance and Economic Development Committee for the 3rd of June 2014. On va commencer la réunion des comités des finances et de développement économique pour le 3 juin. Declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de procès verbaux le 6 May, 6 of May, minutes 43. Carried. Before I begin the rest of the meeting, I'm pleased to welcome a delegation who are visiting us from Kenya. The Honorable Kochi Kipgoji Albert, Speaker, Elgeyo Marakwet County Government Assembly, Republic of Kenya, is with us. The Honorable Festus Kora Kirob, Member, Elgeyo Marakwet County Government Assembly, Republic of Kenya. The Honorable Gilbert Tujan Chiriot, Member, Elgeyo Marakwet County Assembly, Republic of Kenya. Ms. Ashley Whalen, Deputy Director, Democratic Governance, International Republic Institute, United States of America. And Ms. Angela Kisigwa, Resident County Director, International Republic Institute, United States of America. If we could ask our guests to stand, and welcome to Ottawa. Thank you very much for joining us. Item number 1, City Manager's Office 2013 Year-End Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act report summary. We do have, does anyone have any questions on the MFIPA report? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions sur cet rapport? Received. Item number 2, 2014-2018 Municipal Election Compliance Audit Committee, Comité de vérification de la conformité pour les élections 2014-2018. This we have a technical amendment. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Therefore, be it resolved that document 2 listed in this report entitled Compliance Audit Application School Boards 2010-2014 Summary be replaced with the attached and revised document number 2.
So is document 2 up on the screen?
I know what the motion is, but it's within the system.
Okay, so people do have a copy of the schedule. So it's a technical amendment on Councillor Eglai's report. Carried. Any questions on the Election Compliance Audit Committee selection process? No. On the report as presented, as amended rather, carried. Adopté, merci. 2014 municipal elections, reduced opening hours for certain voting places. Élection municipale de 2014, heure d'ouverture écourtée pour certains bureaux de vote. This is primarily at long-term care and seniors' homes. On the report, carried. Item number 14, appointment to the Bank Street BIA Board of Management, nomination au Conseil de gestion de la zone d'amélioration commerciale de la rue Bank. The appointment of Eric Racine. Carried. Item number 5, Lansdowne Partnership Plan report on exercise of delegated authority and proposed amendment to the existing authority for the operations phase. And Councillor Eglai has another motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion is, whereas one column in document 1 to the report on the Lansdowne Partnership Plan has certain words inadvertently transposed, e.g. it read City and OSEG acting reasonably when it should have read discretion of City and OSEG and vice versa. Therefore, be it resolved that document 1 listed in this report entitled Major Decisions under the LPP Master Limited Partnership Agreement, Unanimous Shareholder Agreement be replaced with the attached and revised document 1.
Okay, so this is again a technical amendment. Is there any questions to Councillor Eglai's motion? On the motion, carried, adopté. Any questions or comments on the report as amended? On the report, carried. Merci. Status update, Finance and Economic Development Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 23rd of May. Rapport de situation, demande de renseignement et motion du Comité de finances et de développement économique pour la période se terminer le 23 mai 2014. Received. Treasurer's Report, 2013 Investment and Endowment Fund Report. Rapport sur le Fonds d'investissement de les dons.
Mr. Mayor, I just have a quick question.
Quick question, Councillor Hugh.
Yeah, Madam Treasurer, I'm just looking at the endowment fund returns. In 2014, we're still expecting, regardless of the markets, to, or have we budgeted for a $13 million payout from the fund?
We have, and we've actually already taken the $13 million.
And the fund's still above $200 million?
So yes, it's well above that. We actually have a meeting later this week where we probably will be recommending taking out some further funds.
Right, because of the prudent investment strategy we adopted when we got the money. That's an editorial comment, Mr. Mayor. It just goes to show how well we can manage money when the province frees our hands to do so. The fund's still being managed by Phillips Hager North?
And Leith Wheeler, the two firms.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, so this is very good news, and congratulations to the Treasurer and our investment brokers. Councillor Shirley, do you have a quick question on this?
Yeah, my question is to the Treasurer as to what impact she believes the upcoming changes in provincial hydro policy is going to have on the endowment fund.
No, I'm sorry, the change in, I'm sorry, what was that?
The new provincial hydro policies are going to have on the endowment fund, if any.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not familiar with that proposed change, so I would bring something back to committee for July.
Councillor Shirley? Okay, thank you. So on the report received, congratulations, thank you. Item number 8, capital adjustment and closing of project, city tax and rate support, ajustement de budget des immobilisations et cessation de projets soutenus pour les impôts foncières.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question, but
Okay, so we'll come back to that. Item 8 we'll come back to. Item number 9, rapport sur les services en français 2013, report on French language services 2013. On the report, comment? Is it a quick comment? Yep, Councillor McRae.
I want to thank staff. I'm not sure if they're even in the room, but our office has, they're over there, okay, unbelievable, incredible turnaround with getting translation back and when things are urgent sometimes. So I want to acknowledge, Mr. Mayor, there's competing priorities all the time, but I find that department has provided exceptional service to our office, not just as a ward councillor, but as the chair of the Environment Committee. We get things back very fast, especially when we need them in a big hurry, and it's usually a big hurry. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Merci René pour votre travail.
Merci.
Est-ce qu'il y a des autres commentaires sur ce rapport? Received. Semi-annual performance report to Council Q4 2013, Q1 2014. This is basically referring the reports to the individual standing committees. Carried. Item number 11, Goulburn Recreation. Oh, I'm sorry, received and approved. Item number 11, Goulburn Recreation Complex Remediation Project, projet de remédiation de complexe récréatif de Goulburn.
I just have one question on that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor. Okay, we'll hold
Okay.
it. Planning and Growth Management Department, Urbanisme et Gestion de la Croissance, Brownfields Property Tax Assistance Rehabilitation Grant for 1125, 1129, 1133, 1137, 1145, and 1149 Searville Road. Demande de participation au programme d'allègement de l'impôt foncière sur la propriété 1125, 1129, 1133, 1137, 1145 et 1149 chemin Searville. Carried. Carried. Councillor Tierney is okay with that? Right. Item number 13, 200 Brewer Way, Academy, Westboro Academy, revenue lease renewal. I had a question on that with respect to who is paying the utilities. Who can answer that? Maybe I see that it's a gross revenue lease, and I assume that we pay the utilities?
Mr. Mayor, typically with a gross revenue lease, that would be all in, which would be including the utilities, so there would be an estimation of what the utilities are, and that would be included in the gross rent.
But I guess the challenge I have with that is that there's no incentive for the leasee to conserve energy because we pay the full freight, correct? Most landlords in this day and age would want to have a separate standalone charge for utilities because it's an unknown number. We can estimate, I suppose, and I see that the lease has gone up. But I'm just wondering if, my understanding is this is the third renewal, and I think the final renewal, so I'm not sure what happens after that. I don't have any problem. I think it's a great fit in the community, and it works well, and I know that building very well. But I'm just concerned about, on a go-forward basis, given the uncertainty of, energy pricing, exactly why we wouldn't separate and have the leasee, which has entire run of the building, pay their own utilities. Is there something in the historic lease that says we can't do that, or can we go
That's
back?
correct, Mr. Mayor. Typically, if we were doing a new lease today, we do it on what's called an absolute net lease. Whereas this was done years ago, back in 1999, it was set up as a gross lease, so we're just honoring the original contract in terms of how it was set up, but it would be very rare for the city nowadays to enter into what's called a gross lease. But the contract in 1999 was for a gross lease.
Okay, so with respect to, is this the third of 3 renewals that's permitted?
Yes, this is the last renewal, so it'll be done in 2019, so then we can negotiate a lease at that time.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So on the report, carried. Item number 14, designate 12,587 square feet on the 21st floor at 160 Elgin Street as municipal capital facility. Délégation des 12 587 pieds carrés du 20e étage de 160 rue Elgin. This is the rail implementation office. It saves significant dollars. On the report, carried. Item number 15 is in camera on the Airport Parkway pedestrian cycling bridge, and we'll go in camera for that. So we'll go back to the first item that was held, and that is the capital adjustment and closing of projects, city tax and rate supported items. I believe Councillor Egli had a question, or was it Councillor Deans? Councillor McRae.
Mr. Mayor, I have a very fast question because I'm going to ask staff maybe if they could come back with a memo. Mr. Mayor, last night I was at a meeting in Hunt Club and I was asked about potholes and obviously segued into our discussion about the extra equipment today, which of course I'm going to support. And questions came up with regards to how the city is managing its assets, not just in terms of renewals, so we talked about that, but also looking at other technologies. And I know in speaking with both Mr. Gontier and Mr. Wiley, who both do a very good job, that they are looking at other technologies. And I'm wondering if it's possible to provide direction to staff to come back with a really good memo about how we're dealing with shave and repave, how we're using concrete, that sort of thing. Because I think, Mr. Mayor, you were copied on a tweet one night about using concrete even in some of our road renewal projects. And in speaking with Mr. Gontier, we do consider them, but only if we're doing the complete pipes, because it's very expensive. And also we have issues with regards to accessing utilities. So I'm wondering, as a result of this equipment being on the agenda today, Mr. Mayor, if we could give direction to staff to come back with a very thorough memo that speaks to all those issues, and it may just be combining a whole bunch of previous memos that we've already been issued, if that's something I could ask.
Yeah, and I think I think the tweet on the concrete was from the Concrete Association.
And a resident.
I think that's a very good point. I think a lot of that is in Mr. Goncier's excellent report that he did in terms of the inventory, so we can ask staff to take that as direction, and that's a good suggestion. Just on that, because I discussed with staff and my support for the extra hot boxes, I guess they're called, for pothole repair. Who is here, Mr. Wiley, or I'm looking over here? Oh, the big boss. Larry, come on down. You're the next contestant on. I just, we had talked, Larry, about the idea of having a small version of the grinder machines that can go and do small sections. I look out, for instance, by the Langevin block on Wellington Street. You've patched, and it basically needs to be stripped and repaved because there's so many potholes in that one section outside Langevin. Is part of the funding going to some new technology that can actually do those small grinds that can actually, even out the surface, especially for cyclists?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we actually have a small grinder in use right now. We've been able to lease through our existing agreements with the supplier, so we are experimenting with that now. This process is not just hot box. We're looking at asphalt content, different ways of doing the pothole patching, different types of asphalt. We're getting a spray applicator that will hopefully improve the quality of the patch. So this is more than just the hot box. It will be a comprehensive review of pothole patching, and we'll try to come up with a better product.
Great, thank you. Councillor Deans?
Well, don't go away, Larry, because I have one specific question, one more general, but the specific one's for you, so I'll ask that first. The request is for just over $200,000 for hot box trailers, and I understand that, and I think we all get that would be a good acquisition. But my question is, why is there a request here for $200,000 and then a request on Transportation Committee tomorrow for $360,000, which would seem like the same thing?
That's a good question, but what we're doing here is creating the funds. We had some capital funds within our account, and now we're taking the additional funds to transfer in to top up to the value we needed. So we were able to find some funding in-house to make that work.
Okay, so I don't quite understand. So there's 360 tomorrow on transportation, and there's 200 here today. So why is it in two different places? And yeah, I just don't get it.
This particular funding, as Mr. O'Keefe said, is we're rescoping it. You already had approved this funding. We're now saying use it for these hot boxes instead. The money that is being requested at transportation is incremental money that you hadn't already budgeted for. That's the difference between the two.
So the total request is basically just over $500,000, but some of it's being repurposed and some of it's new.
That's correct.
Okay, fine. Thank you. And the second question is just a bit more of a general one. Just wondering, the new projects, how they made this list. And I don't mean to send her any out. Some make total sense to me, but like intersection control, is this the one that was next on the request list and it just got moved in? Or how did that work?
These are a list that was provided to us by the department when we go, the departments, I should say, when we go out and start the closure project. They identify things, additional works that they want to accelerate or that were thought could be accommodated through a closure, through the closure process. So they identify them. How they initially get to the determination that they want to advance these works is the departments would have to speak to, but when they come forward with these, we, for example, Mr. O'Keefe's, we look at it and see if there's a way to accommodate it within the adjustments we're making without actually, excuse me, having to take money from the reserves, looking at your existing accounts and whether they can be repurposed.
No, I totally understand that. Just curious how these particular projects got on this list, because these weren't funded in the 2014 budget. Now here they are. And just not clear if these were the top priority and they just rose up on those long lists that show up at budget time, or like they just seem to have come out of the blue here. So just looking for an explanation of how they arrived here on this list.
Mr. Mayor, and further to what the Treasurer is saying, there really is a mix of projects listed here, and some of them would have been on existing priorities, and they were prioritized, and so they've made it here. Other ones have come up, and you'll see they require additional money because the priority was there, but because of the work that's being done, like the first one on the intersection modification for the Portobello turnaround, it just requires additional money. So it's a real mix, and they align with, and we'd have to go through individual by individual council priorities, but there's very different reasons for most of them to be here individually.
Okay, I would just ask that between now and when this rises to council, that we're provided with an explanation of each of these, because I don't have any context for any of these on this list, and I'd just like to know what it is that triggered these to be on the list. So if you could just provide a memo to us with an explanation, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions on the list? I should point out, item number 3 is very good news. We're adding $2 million back to the tax-supported reserve. 19.3 goes back to rate-supported reserve, and we reduced debt authority by $6.2 million. So overall, it's a very good indication that all of these projects closing out have, by and large, been kept under budget, and we're able to return significant dollars back to the reserve funds as well as reduce the debt authority. So congratulations to staff on that achievement. On the report is presented. Carried. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the Goulburn Recreation Complex Remediation Project de remédiation de complexe récréatif de Goulburn. Councillor Eglai had held. Councillor Shad Quadri, would you like to introduce this as it's in your community, or would you like to go to Councillor's questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd just like to say a few words on this project. First of all, this project is about 14 years old, and it's run into some problems in terms of its ongoing infrastructure issues that staff have identified, and I just want to make sure that the committee understands the full implication of this unit in terms of the city's facility portfolio. It is a good asset for the city. As far as back in 2012 or 2011, it was number 4 highest earner in the city in terms of revenue generated for the city. And I just want to make sure that this is a city asset that is turned into a liability for now. And I'm looking for support from the committee to approve the funding recommended by staff. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Eglai, please. Diane, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In reading the report, I just had one question that arose out of it, and it says that as part of its regular inspection process, ISD initiated a structural adequacy review with GRC in July 2010. The inspection identified evidence of corrosion in the structural steel components of both the pool and the arena. There was no immediacy suggested for the execution of remedial work at the time. And then we jump ahead to 2012, and it seems that a whole series of problems are unearthed at that point. So I'm wondering, what do we think happened in that less than 2-year period that caused the problems, and do we have processes in place now so that we can pick up on those problems more quickly?
Chair, the structural adequacy review that was done in 2010 did identify some rusting, but certainly no immediate need for action, and it's something that we put in our plan in terms of some additional painting that needed to be done to address the concern. So it was not highlighted as a significant concern, but pools are a harsh environment, so it's to be expected in terms of some level of deterioration. There were other items that are also identified in terms of problems with air tightness of the building, and also some leakage with the lantern, which is basically it's a two-level ceiling structure, and there was some leakage, and there was works planned around that. It's when those works were initiated, and we needed to start getting into the ceiling cavity. So basically elements that were not originally visible, that's when we started to discover mold. And then basically following the process, that's when some of the concerns started to get highlighted. As we followed the mold, basically some of the building components that were hidden needed to be exposed, and then that's when the series of concerns started to be identified with some of the structural columns around the perimeter of the building.
But if we go to the report, as early as even 2004, we're seeing problems. And every time we go back, we seem to see more problems. So I guess the nature of my question is, have we learned anything from this experience that would allow us to see more problems earlier, get them fixed faster, and hopefully by doing that in a more efficient and less expensive way? I guess have we learned from this experience and have amended our processes accordingly so we don't run into this sort of situation again?
Yes, we've definitely learned from the experience. The other thing also is when we are doing these reviews, we're putting the onus on the engineers that are doing the review that if there's any areas where they have not access because it's basically blocked, that basically if they have any concerns, that these need to be flagged to our attention so that we can provide direction to proceed with further additional testing. Now, in this case of this building in 2010, when we did the structural adequacy review, was basically that phase of the building was 10 years old. So would we be expecting this level of deterioration on a building that's 10 years old? No, we would not be. And also where the deterioration occurred in areas that are not visible. And it's through more sophisticated testing that we were able to identify the level of deterioration. Essentially, the deterioration was actually occurring from within the support column. So even looking at it visually, we would have not have seen that. So there are lessons learned, but also the fact that we would not be expecting this level of deterioration on such a young building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Building on what Councillor Eglai was saying, we need to be clear that this was a facility that was built not under the city standards that we would build today. Your assessment of the repairs needed here, if I understand correctly, is not complete. There's still half the facility that has to be checked. Is that correct?
Correct. We're in the process of verifying also the arena, which was basically built at the same time. The pool and the arena were built prior to amalgamation at the same time. We are proceeding with an investigation of the arena. At this point, we're not anticipating the same level of problems that we found in the pool. For one, it's a very different environment.
So what, in this $4 million, is there, what is the contingency piece that's being built in case there is additional costs here in the other parts?
Mr. Mayor, I can speak to that. What we've done here is when this estimate was prepared, we were at the preliminary stage. We're about 6 weeks away from tendering and finalizing our design. So based on the level we're at, we're carrying approximately 30% contingency. And the driver for that is the level of detail we're at this point. And secondly, when you're dealing with a renewal work in the interface between fixing and renewal, we wanted to ensure that sufficient funds are in place so we can correct these problems.
And when you do correct these problems and you're in there doing the work, obviously in a major retrofit like this, which I don't think we've ever undertaken something of that scope, is that correct? Where we've gone in and taken out like the steel beams and so on and so forth. What measures do we put in place to make sure that there's not further damages, to example, for the buried pipes and the other infrastructure that we're not planning on touching? Will that be the responsibility of the contractor if any of that's damaged, or will we carry that risk?
Mr. Mayor, yeah, the contractor will be obligated to follow the terms and conditions of our contract, and they're obligated to not cause any damage while undertaking their work. We have both city staff, engineers, and architects overseeing during the construction phase to ensure that all work is completed in accordance with the contracts, and should they cause any damage by their works, they'd be held accountable and would be responsible for payment of those repairs.
And one last question, if I may. Given that this end of town, the West End, which the GRC serves not only Councillor Caudry's area, but my area, Councillor Eglai's and Councillor Moffat's, and Councillor Wilkinson's, is there any opportunity while we're doing this work to see if there's any room to expand this facility to better serve the residents of that area? Have we looked at that, or is this just pure, let's go in and repair and get out?
Mr. Mayor, this is the approach being taken here is to do the repairs, and the only thing we'd be looking at doing a little bit differently. We may have to, because of the structural repairs we have to undertake, it may have impacts on the slide. So if we were going to impact that slide, we'd be looking to replace it with another amenity or another slide. So it would just be really putting back what's in place or a variation of it.
So not adding new equipment other than to replace what may have to.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Deans, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my question is just a little broader, but it's looking at this building, and this is a lot of money in repairs for a relatively young building. I certainly appreciate that the work needs to be done, but I am left shaking my head and wondering, how does this happen? How does a 14-year-old building get into this state? That young a building, if that happened across the system, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So what went wrong with this project, or what went wrong with the construction that left us with this big bill?
Mr. Mayor, maybe if I could take that question, and Wayne can add or supplement or correct if I make a mistake here. But my understanding is that the original phase of this center, the first piece of it, was designed and built by the Township of Goulburn prior to amalgamation, and there clearly, based on the outcome of what we're finding, there were problems with either the design or the construction of that building, or both, in terms of how that was done. My understanding is that project was one that was done very quickly. It was done almost immediately prior to amalgamation.
Expand the reserves.
There was a pattern on behalf of some of the former municipalities to try to spend reserves on local infrastructure prior to amalgamation, and I think that's part of the history of this project.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really want to go back and hash the errors of amalgamation. However, this I think we should debate whether we should de-amalgamate. Now, actually, certainly so you can save a couple $1 billion doing that. Everybody thinks you save money when you do these things. Anyway, aside from that, in your view, there's no option but to do this repair.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Well, if there's no option, I don't really know why we're debating it. I really think that we have to do this, and if Shad says it's okay with me.
Councillor Caudry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And just coming back to look at some of the questions that have been asked this morning. First of all, in terms of the building itself, obviously it went through some standards through the regional government that was partially responsible for those standards at those times. Secondly, in terms of the expansion that Councillor Hubley asked, there are certain things that Mr. Newell mentioned in terms of the slide that if that is taken down or removed for whatever reason, doesn't fit in the new structure, then they would be looking at putting it, replacing it with another feature into the pool. In terms of the pool itself, as one of my colleagues mentioned, how important it is into the West End, and all you can see right now, it's a good thing that we had Ridgecraft open up when it did. Otherwise, we'd really be in a tough time out in the West End for the pool services. In terms of this structure, as Councillor Clark mentioned, it's no use going back to the past. It's moving forward from here on in and make sure that we do as good a job as we can going forward. And, that's where I'm at today, and that's where I think staff are at today, and I hope the committee supports that position. Having said all that, Mr. Mayor, I do want to thank staff for keeping myself and my office and the community up to date in terms of what's happening with the pool. And, community is not happy with what the final fix is, but they're happy to see it go forward. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Caudry. I know it's been a challenge for the community, and appreciate your work on this with staff. So on the report as presented, carried. Okay, Councillor Clark, we're going to go in camera now. Before I do that, I should point out our colleague, Councillor Tierney, was re-elected as Vice Chair of the Ontario Caucus of Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So congratulations, Councillor Tierney, for representing us, and appreciate your leadership role at FCM. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you. This article, Article 15, Airport Parkway Ped Cycling Bridge, in camera, that in accordance with Procedure Bylaw 2006-462 as amended, Finance and Economic Development Committee resolve in camera pursuant to subsection 13(1)A, litigation or potential litigation affecting the city, including matters before administrative tribunals, and subsection 13(1)F, the receiving advice is subject to solicitor-client privilege.
On the motion?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question to the city solicitor. On the motion.
On the motion, Councillor McRae to the solicitor.
Mr. Mayor, to the city solicitor, I want to confirm, I know, Mr. Mayor, we're going in camera to discuss these issues, and of course I'll vote for this motion. Could Mr. O'Connor confirm with the committee, with the media, so that the members of the public know that when we rise and report that items that can be discussed in public, we will be discussing. Obviously, we shouldn't be discussing. Sorry, I can't see Mr. O'Connor anymore. Obviously, we won't be discussing our litigation strategy in public because that's proprietary and we don't want to prejudice our case. But, Mr. Mayor, a big mistake that we made during the light rail debate was to have too many in-camera discussions about litigation, and I'm hoping that we will be discussing as much as we possibly can on the record, so it's very crystal clear in the eyes of the public exactly where the city stands with respect to litigation matters.
Mr. Mayor, the ward council is absolutely correct. I know that this council has been very clear about the fewest amount of closed meetings that it can possibly have in providing as much information to the public, and there will be a public statement made afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Clark for Section 2, please.
Okay, the other reason for this going in camera is that per section to 13(1)D, labor relations or employee negotiations, receiving advice subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communication necessary.
So two parts to the motion. On the motion by Councillor Clark, carried. So we'll take a 5-minute recess before moving in camera. I'd ask that the room be cleared and that staff who do not have to be present, please leave the room as well. And please remember to bring all of your belongings with you as you exit. Nous allons maintenant prendre une pause de 5 minutes avant de poursuivre la réunion à huis clos. Merci. Okay, we'll begin the meeting now that we're back out of camera. Today we received confidential briefings from the city manager and city clerk and solicitor on the steps that have been taken to deal with some of the issues that Mr. DeVries identified in his report on the Airport Parkway pedestrian cycling bridge project. First, the briefing included a confidential overview of the personnel assessments of responsibility arising from the project. Premièrement, nous avons reçu un aperçu confidentiel de l'évaluation de responsabilité de personnel en lien avec ce projet. While we cannot discuss such labor relations matters in public, the city manager has assured the committee, and I'm confident that corrective actions have been taken and that staff have been held accountable for their roles in this project. Secondly, the committee received an update from the city clerk and solicitor on both the litigation and potential litigation with respect to the Airport Parkway pedestrian cycling bridge. As both discussions were subject to solicitor-client privilege, there will be no reporting out on either of the briefings at this time. However, I can confirm that no votes were taken during the course of the closed meeting. In addition, I can advise that today the City of Ottawa filed its claim against WSP Canada Incorporated, formerly Genevar, calling on that company to pay for the $4.6 million in costs that have resulted from their design. This multi-million-dollar claim demonstrates the city's commitment to also holding its outside consultants accountable for the role that they played in this troubled project. Cette poursuite de plusieurs millions de dollars démontre l'engagement de la ville à tenir ses consultants externes responsables pour le rôle qu'ils ont joué dans ce projet. Finally, I've asked the city manager to circulate all members of council an update on the implementation of the plan prepared in response to the recommendations set out of the DeVries report, that he will be giving a verbal update as well following Councillor McRae's comments. Councillor McRae, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be very brief, Mr. Mayor, in reiterating what I've said for years and years and years, and that is, Mr. Mayor, the failure of the combination of city staff, consultants, contractors, engineers, designers, to not deliver this project on time and in the budget is an abysmal disgrace, and it's certainly not reflective of the city that I want to be part of, and certainly not reflective of the many, many projects that have been successfully completed. And I'm pleased, Mr. Mayor, to see the aggressive stance taken today by Mr. Kirkpatrick and also by the city solicitor with respect to the litigation. And I trust that the city solicitor is going to continue to aggressively pursue litigation, including squeezing out every last cent of costs. This is an action that has not only embarrassed the city, Mr. Mayor, it's caused reputational risk that we can't build a bridge over 4 lanes of traffic in the time frame we're supposed to. But, Mr. Mayor, it also has been disappointing to the community, who rightfully deserve to get this infrastructure completed. And I think, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Kirkpatrick has indicated publicly during the third-party review that he intends to oversee, through the Deputy City Manager, cultural changes to the department with respect to their roles and responsibility. And I want to reiterate again, Mr. Mayor, that I'm going to do everything I can every day, as I have every single day since I first saw the wretched concrete falling from the bridge on the way home, the way to work, the way home, the way to work, and I think the message is clear here, that I'm going to do what I can to make sure that staff and the consultants are held accountable for their legal roles and responsibilities. And I believe that today is another step along that route. And I expect, Mr. Mayor, that at your direction, you're going to instruct the city manager to come back to committee to update us when there are significant issues to raise. So, for example, if there's a statement of defense filed, that sort of thing, that we'll hear about it. And at the end of the day, Mr. Mayor, I look forward to us going to that site, hopefully by the end of the fall, and opening the bridge, not only to put this behind us as again, a disgraceful action on the part of some of our staff and the contractor and the consultant, but that we actually finished the project and got it done so we can move forward. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Mayor, I don't ever want to see anything like this to the extent that we can put the power and the tools in place. I never want to see this happening again, whether it's a big project like a bridge, a multi-million-dollar project, or whether it's an even larger project that we have coming in the future. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to speak to this issue. And thank you again to Mr. Kirkpatrick and to the City Solicitor for aggressively pursuing action to try and redress the wrongs that have been done to the taxpayers and to this city.
Thank you, Councillor. City Manager.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of committee will recall the last time we were together to discuss this, one of the key directions that came from committee was to move aggressively and quickly to implement the changes that the third-party review of the Airport Parkway pedestrian bridge identified as key improvements that needed to be made in the Infrastructure Services Division. So I can tell members of the committee that shortly after that, within weeks, I met with Nancy Shepherd and Wayne Newell to review the approach that needed to be taken to this I'll call it this organizational renewal for ISD. And the background to that was that there were already some significant change initiatives underway in ISD, and they stemmed from previous reviews, audits, and assessments, just some key ones, and members of the committee will be familiar with them. The third-party review that we'd done over a year ago with regards to the 174 storm sewer failure, an independent review of the and audit of the construction supervision that the previous Auditor General had conducted. We had a business process review underway in terms of payment and change order processes. Significant workplace assessment had gone on the year previously in ISD, and employee engagement surveys that we conducted in 2009, 11, and 13. So what I directed was that the work that was ongoing with all of those things, I didn't want to stop, but I wanted it to be put together in a comprehensive plan, including the third-party recommendations, or review recommendations, into I'll call it an integrated management program for change in ISD. So that's what's in place. In a minute I'll talk about some of the short-term actions that have already happened. Later this week I will send a memo to members of council with a full description and details of what I'm presenting verbally here today. But the objectives that we set for this renewal in ISD, sort of 4 high-level objectives. First, of course, to respond to the recommendations of the independent review. Secondly, to have an integrated management plan that would incorporate all of those recommendations and common elements of those other reviews that I referred to. The objective is that this renewal needs to be inclusive at all levels within the department and also with external stakeholders. In particular, we want to identify what are key changes that we need to make with in terms of relationships with our contractors and our consultants. The third is to strengthen what we're calling and focusing in ISD as a plan, do, check, act philosophy. And this relates primarily to the findings and recommendations around oversight, and when risk is identified that it needs to be elevated. And this is a primary response to the findings of the review that risks were identified late, and when they were identified, they weren't always elevated to either senior management and, most importantly, to members of council. And finally, to apply a risk-based approach and escalation protocols through all phases of a project, and focusing on managing contracts and not administering them. Some of the short-term actions that started in April and continue now was there have been, as you would expect, a series of meetings with all staff in the 3 design and construction branches to discuss the outcome of the independent review, to garner their commitment to the changes that review identified that needed to be placed, as well as what I've described as the overall integrated management program of change. There have been training sessions that have taken place with all staff on construction contract management. We've worked with supply on linking consultant payments to deliverables and milestones. Departmental directives have been issued that highlight risk escalation protocols, the requirement to maintain an overall project schedule from the commencement of a project and to report on it frequently, the clarification of project management expectations related to the management of consultant contracts and deliverables, guidance on the pre-qualification of contractors, requirement for pre-bid meetings with contractors, and a reminder of the expectation to adhere to departmental policies and procedures. In terms of the escalation that I was talking about a minute ago, we've put into place and have communicated that program managers are expected to meet bi-weekly with project managers and branch managers with program managers to review project risks related to scope, budget, schedule, compliance, and overall ability to deliver, and that this kind of focused and timely oversight continues throughout the life of a project. ISD Departmental Management Team will continue to meet bi-weekly to review the project status of the entire suite of projects that are being managed at any given point in time, with a focus on those that are posing a higher risk to budget and schedule, including escalating concerns as required. I can tell you there'll be more detail in the memo that I provide you with later this week, but I'd like to conclude, Mr. Mayor, by saying I have also discussed this integrated management program with the Auditor General. As members of the committee know, the Auditor General has been directed to build into his work plan to come back and to do a post-implementation review of management's work in these areas. But as part of that, I've discussed the IMP with the Auditor General. I've communicated to him that I'm very confident that it represents a very well thought through and comprehensive plan to effect the change in ISD that needs to be made. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions on the City Manager's report? No. Okay. Thank you very much. So we have information previously distributed. Economic Update, May 2014. Delegated Authority Report, Item B. Notice the motion for consideration at subsequent meeting. Inquiries, Councillor McCrae.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Whereas in years past, corporate security management and staff work cooperatively and collaboratively with members of council, residents, other city departments, and the police to address safety and security issues in city parks, etc. And whereas corporate security would provide assistance in the form of advice and deploying equipment such as infrared mobile cameras, etc., can staff please provide City Council with an update by the end of June 2014 as to what services and equipment are available to assist members of City Council in addressing community safety issues.
Okay, thank you. Any other inquiries? Other business? Adjournment? Carried. Next meeting, prochaine réunion, le 3 juillet 2014. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.